Hello and welcome to the Capital Forum's Antitrust Thought Leader Series. I'm Paul McLeod with the Capital Forum. I'm here with Bruce Sokler, who is kindly joining us as he's the co-chair of the antitrust practice at Mintz. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's start off talking a little bit about private equity in healthcare. We've seen so much about that recently. We saw DOJ and HHS launch a joint inquiry into corporate greed in healthcare. We saw the FTC recently hold an event around analyzing private equity investment in the healthcare industry. A lot of smoke here. And obviously the rhetoric around it is very powerful, but what do you expect to actually come out of this?
I actually expect a couple of enforcement litigations, and we will see how the courts react to the matter. This is not a new issue. The FTC, over the past couple of years, has twice brought actions that ended up in consent decrees against private equity roll-ups of veterinarian groups. And then, of course, the FTC has also brought a case that's pending in Texas about roll-ups of anesthesia practices in Texas. And putting the rhetoric to one side and just trying to distill it to its essence, that the enforcers believe that this roll-up strategy that is a basic part of private equity's playbook leads to market power, and they haven't had the opportunity really to stop it before it's too late. So they're putting a big spotlight with a lot of rhetoric on it. I know we're going to talk about the merger guidelines. There's a leitmotif about private equity in the merger guidelines. There are pending reforms to the Hart-Scott-Rodino filing form. And we heard yesterday from a DOJ representative that will be finalized within weeks, not months, his language. In there, they're asking for a lot more information. So they have information on deals that predate and perhaps post-date the deal that did get caught by being big enough to require a Hart-Scott filing.
Now, I've heard some responses from the more pro-private equity side arguing that they're essentially being singled out. I mean, there's obviously a lot of consolidation in the healthcare industry from private equity and from, United Health Group, for example, large insurers. There's various forms of this happening, and what they're arguing is you're unfairly targeting us because by nature of us being private equity. And I wonder what your thoughts on that would be.
Well, I guess the reason I'm not of the view that the FTC and DOJ are over their skis here is twofold. First, they have received a lot of complaints from providers or people who work with providers that life really changes once private equity owns these healthcare entities in terms of staffing, in terms of number of patients you have to see, and things of that nature. And there's enough smoke that it's not unreasonable to think the enforcers believe there's fire. The second one, the big poster child right now, is something called Steward Healthcare, which is up in Massachusetts. And it is a hospital and physician group that was bought by private equity a number of years ago, flipped once, and is now circling the drain. And there's a lot of political, naturally, reaction to that because many of the hospitals in that Steward group are smaller community hospitals. So you have Senators Warren and Markey introducing legislation now on top of what the enforcers are doing. You have the head of the Massachusetts State Senate introducing a bill to bar private equity in healthcare in Massachusetts, and those sort of bad examples, if you in quotes, is something that's hard for the proponents of private equity to say, don't look here, there's nothing to look at.
Right. So it's not just the politics, it really is underlying issues.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, well, let's turn for a moment to the new merger guidelines. I mean, as you yourself have written, the consumer welfare standard was considered the North Star of antitrust for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Are we entering a new era where the consumer welfare standard is gone for good?
Well, the way you put it, I would answer, talk to me a year from now and tell me who's president. But consumer welfare has been the leading standard for approximately 40 years. There were some Supreme Court cases in the 70s that first used it. It's an economics test, which frankly, there's a fair amount of disagreement as to exactly what it means. But it's not embedded in the statute in any way. It's a policy choice.
As Lena Khan is quick to point out.
Right. And as a policy choice, you can choose a different policy. Now, there's a lot of case law out there without consumer welfare, using consumer welfare. And, she or the FTC is bringing 2 cases right now where she's trying to use the new approach, the new merger guidelines approach. That's the hospital merger case in North Carolina and the Kroger-Albertsons grocery merger. And we'll see how that's received by the courts.
Yeah, there seems like there's so much uncertainty right now. I guess I'm curious what you tell your clients when they're coming to you asking you about where are the lines now? I mean, how much of these new merger guidelines, how much are they really going to move the courts towards the direction that this administration clearly wants them to move?
Well, it's a complex question. You always had the issue of risk analysis or risk allocation in any sort of deal, and there's always of uncertainty, and it's always an issue that's negotiated between the parties. Now you're not totally sure how the courts are going to take it. And, there's the additional risk that there is an increased likelihood that you would have to have a delay of a second request, a delay of litigation, the costs that are associated with both. And you have to decide whether, the game is worth the candle, whether the deal is worth it. So, there's probably X percent of deals that might have been tried 5 years ago that aren't being tried right now during this period where we don't know where the out-of-bounds lines truly are.
Yeah.
And in terms of counseling clients, the best you can do is sort of lay it out. And ultimately, it's the clients that have to decide how much risk they tolerate. And it's the clients and the party on the other side who have to decide how to allocate that risk.
Was there anything particularly notable for you that was in the draft guidelines but didn't make it to the final version? Any walkbacks that you thought were particularly impactful?
Well, it depends on how it plays out when they apply them. I mean, one notable change, of course, that received a fair amount of criticism was that all the economic discussion and the economic analysis was, quote, relegated to an appendix, suggesting that it might not be as prominent in the agency's analysis. In the final guidelines, they moved it up and interweaved it somewhat. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's a distinction. There will be a difference at the end of the day. And but I think it means that you will have economists still involved on the agency side and on the private party side. I mentioned that one of the 2 cases currently being litigated is the North Carolina hospital case. And, there's a battle of economists going on there, even though expressly the FTC is litigating it under the new merger guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's tie these threads together. I mean, if you're the head of a private equity fund, what are you making of these new guidelines and how it's going to affect that industry?
Well, I think this what they're hearing from their counsel, their antitrust counsel, and maybe even their deal counsel, is that there's likely to be a timing effect under any circumstance. Private equity likes to do their deals fast and close them fast.
Yeah.
And some of that might not be able to occur under this new regime, particularly when the new Hart-Scott forms go into effect, paren, but there's probably going to be some litigation on that before that happens, close paren. You have to decide, if you're private equity, how important this set of deals, this strategy, this market, this product is for your business plan in terms of return or whatever. I mean, the worst thing is in I think it was the veterinarian case. I know it's one of these cases. The parties had to agree to, or at least agreed to, a prior approval requirement for future transactions in those geographic markets. And there are two flavors of priors. There's prior notice, which you tell them about it, even though it's not Hart-Scott, but you go forward until and unless they try to stop you for one reason or another. Prior approval, of course, is mother may I. You can't go forward. You've entered into basically a contract and a consent decree. So you need their approval before you can go forward, which is a much heavy hand, or a heavier hand.
Is your whole business going to go from trying to avoid second requests now to just assuming that you're going to have to go through the process?
Well, without talking about what industry, what client, whatever, I mean, I told the board this week, there's no reason why this merger can't clear within 30 to 60 days. There's no reason to guarantee that it will clear in 30 or 60 days. You just don't know these days.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the new HSR forms? We've been hearing quite a lot of opinions about those as well.
Well, they clearly, even the FTC/DOJ thought that it would increase the time you needed to fill the form by, if I remember right, 130 hours or something like that. Most people in my world thought that number was woefully low. Again, alluding to the panel yesterday of DOJ people, when the HSR form was discussed, he said, we've heard you and we've made changes, taken away some of the burden. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding when we see it. I doubt it will meet all the objections and criticisms that were raised, because the purpose of it was to get their arms around a lot more than just the deal in front of them and the products in front of them, other private equity or other type of deals, adjacent products and things of that nature. Far more requirements for documents up front than currently exist. And so we'll just have to see how it plays out.
So Bruce, for our final topic, I just wrote the letters AI and then 5 question marks here. I know you've been following this issue closely. We are, of course, at the ABA conference, where it sort of feels like every third or fourth panel has some tie to AI. Obviously, everyone's trying to figure out the beginning of this new reality we're in. So really my question for you is, just as someone who is following this, what is the AI legal issue that you are most paying attention to or looking forward to see how it develops?
All right. So I'll answer that question, but I'll give you 30 seconds of context and background.
Please.
A year ago, there was a lot of talk about whether there'd be AI or big tech legislation. And, different people in Congress attempted to move such things. Nothing moved. And I think the vast majority of people, virtually a unanimous consensus is that legislation is not going to happen here anytime soon.
The tech legislation. Tech, yes.
Yes, yeah. Or even AI legislation of anything meaningful. Then, subsequent to the spring meeting, the government withdrew the healthcare antitrust guidelines that came out in 1996. And they said that because they thought they were outdated, because they thought that the information that they had characterized as safe harbor and older data, now in a world of AI, was now usable in potentially anti-competitive ways, which is the backdrop to the direct answer to your question, which is algorithms. That is, right now there's private litigation, there's remarks going up by FTC and DOJ, there are workshops as to whether algorithms that people use to obtain pricing information that seems to inevitably and invariably lead to higher prices can be litigated under current antitrust law. Because the response by people who are under the microscope here is, where's the agreement?
Yeah.
And most of Section 1 case law requires an agreement. You can have implicit agreements, which is where the government is trying to go. That is, if everyone knows, what is the consequence of using a algorithm product to which everybody in the industry supplies product and gives you answers that lets you raise prices, whether it's hotels in Atlantic City or other areas. That, according to statement of interest that the government has filed, should be per se illegal under Section 1. That will probably work its way out one way or another, at least preliminarily, in some decisions in the next year. It has profound consequences. And yet, like we were discussing before, with the guidelines withdrawn, with the safe harbors gone, it complicates counseling a tremendous amount because we don't know where the out-of-bounds lines are. Mm-hmm. We don't know what's safe. And, but there are people, trade associations all over Washington, people who gather data. We all know how important data is, et cetera. And they have to, they can't stop their businesses. Or if they're a trade association, it may be one of the most valuable things that the trade association does.
Sure. So
they have to get the best advice they can and, move on and keep their eyes, on what's going on and their ear to the ground.
You still believe this will be hashed out under current antitrust law and
Yes.
the chance for you're not optimistic.
I'm
about
not
Congress.
optimistic at all.
Well,
Other people might be, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Bruce Sokler, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and appreciate you coming by and talking to us.
My pleasure.